like and subscribe. Beyond Antarctica. Chapter 14. As the Celeb Mariner sailed the unpredictable seas, an unsettling pattern of mysterious malfunctions began to plague its journey. The malfunctions were sporadic at first, flickering lights and unexplained power outages. However, as the frequency and severity of the incidents increased, the dismissive murmurs among the crew grew into outspoken concerns. What started as a series of technical anomalies soon morphed into the suspicion of sabotage. The atmosphere aboard the Celeb Mariner thickened with tension, each crew member eyeing the other. The possibility that someone among them could be undermining the ship's operations shifted the crew's dynamic. Conversations became hushed, meetings more frequent and secretive, and trust, a commodity once abundant, now seemed scarce. As the ship continued its journey, the hidden depths seemed to mirror the growing depths of suspicion on board, casting a shadow over the crew. Tensions intensified as vital supplies began to mysteriously vanish. It wasn't just random odds and ends. Critical resources like food and essential engine parts were now noticeably absent. The impact was immediate. The engine, the heart of the ship, showed signs of problems, and the crew's morale plummeted alongside their dwindling food stores. Accusations began to fly, targeting those who had openly voiced their longing to return home. The air was thick with suspicion, as every misplaced item or unexplained absence turned into grounds for heated arguments. The situation reached a peak when Todd reported that specific custom-made parts, essential for maintaining the engine's efficiency, were missing. This revelation caused a near panic. John realized that without these parts, their voyage could be fatally compromised. Meetings were called, with everyone required to account for their actions and whereabouts. John tried to maintain order, but the growing distrust seemed to thwart every effort to unify the crew. It was during one of these tense gatherings that Kim suggested searching personal quarters, a proposal that only deepened the rift, as some crew members saw it as an invasion of their privacy and a breach of trust. The Celeb Mariner was plunged into crisis one fateful night when the ship's engine suddenly failed. The timing couldn't have been worse. They were navigating through treacherous waters, relying heavily on the engine's power to bring stability. Todd, drenched in sweat, discovered the cause quickly. It was clear sabotage. Critical wires had been cleanly cut, not worn down by wear or accident. This malicious act wasn't just a minor setback. It was a direct threat to their survival at sea. As the crew rallied to make repairs, the atmosphere was tense with not just the strain of physical labor, but the heavy burden of betrayal. Repairing the engine took 3 grueling hours as Todd had to improvise, due to the missing parts. This act of sabotage erased any remaining doubts about the presence of a saboteur among them. Fear and suspicion reached a boiling point, with crew members casting accusatory glances even as they worked side by side to save their ship and themselves. As dawn broke, the engine sputtered back to life thanks to the tireless efforts of the crew, but the damage done was more than mechanical. Suspicion had seeded itself among the crew members, each exchange filled with unspoken accusations and mistrust, overshadowing their efforts with a pervasive sense of betrayal. The ship had been saved, but the unity of its crew had suffered a blow that would prove challenging to mend. As the tension aboard the Celeb Mariner escalated, John ordered a thorough inspection of the ship. During a routine check of rarely used storage areas, Tony stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a panel in the lower decks, expecting to find stashed supplies. He was stunned to instead find a young woman from the tribal village. Questions flew as he gently coaxed her out of her cramped hiding spot. Her presence on the ship was a mystery that no one had anticipated. Her motive was desperate yet straightforward. She was there to learn the secrets of their technology, particularly how they traveled the seas without attracting the deadly sea predators, a knowledge she believed could save her people. But overwhelmed by the ship's size and complexity, she had found herself trapped, unable to navigate through the unfamiliar corridors without being caught, leading her to hide. The crew was divided on how to handle her presence. While some advocated for her immediate return to shore, fearing further complications, Others wanted her tossed overboard for placing their lives at risk. Bick, peering over at the glowing skull, voiced his belief that a pyramid or similar structure must be nearby, resonating with the skull. Despite the risk, John decided to drop off the girl at the beach and investigate Bick's claims. When they arrived, they released the girl, and that's when they saw it. On top of a nearby hill, they saw an obelisk towering majestically against the sky. After a few hours of travel, they arrived at the obelisk. This structure bore the same cryptic hieroglyphs as those found on other ancient sites they had encountered. As Kim examined the symbols more closely, she theorized that the obelisk was not just a monument, but a marker detailing the voyages of an ancient people who stopped to help and gather people along their coastal adventure that was left behind in the great migration or journey that the original inhabitants had undertaken. While engrossed in the significance of their find, Todd, scanning the horizon, noticed disturbances on the beach. "Sir, look at the beach," he called out, alerting the others. Tony squinted towards the shore and confirmed. "It's the tribe, at least 1,000 warriors, and they're right by our dinghy. Sir, the girl we released is pointing up here. They're now heading this way." "I don't like this, sir," Todd says. Realizing the imminent threat, John quickly devised an escape route. "We won't go back the way we came. We'll rappel down the mountain, through the woods, and straight to the beach, aiming to bypass them." As they executed the escape, the sounds of tribal calls grew louder. Slipping through the trees and undergrowth, they reached the dinghy just in time to see the tribe burst from the tree line, now in pursuit. They quickly board the dinghy and throttle up. The warriors halted abruptly at the water's edge, a boundary they refused or dared not cross, just meters away. Kim let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was close," she mumbled. John, shotgun in hand, ensured no warriors dared follow. The tribal calls echoed behind them, a stark reminder of the dangers they had narrowly escaped. After their harrowing escape from the tribal warriors and the return to the Celeb Mariner, the crew faced a daunting new reality. Bob delivered the grim news that their makeshift repairs had failed, leaving the ship immobile and adrift. Kim, peering anxiously through the window, voiced her concern. "That's not good. Those women are up to something." Her intuition proved correct as John and Bob joined her to observe the ominous activities on shore. The tribal warriors were felling trees along the beach line. "They're building something," John noted, the worry evident in his voice. "The construction project was massive. If they decide to come out here, we are in real trouble," John continued. The crew could face an overwhelming assault for which they were not prepared. The sense of being trapped grew as they considered their options, each more desperate than the last. "We need a plan, and fast," Bob stated, turning from the window to face the rest of the crew, pushing them to brainstorm on any possible means to restore the ship's mobility. As night fell, the sounds of construction continued, a reminder of the impending threat. The crew set about fortifying the Celeb Mariner as best they could, preparing for what might come with the dawn. As the first light of dawn spread across the horizon, no one on the Celeb Mariner had managed to find rest. The incessant sounds of construction had hammered through the night. Kim stepped onto the deck, her gaze fixed towards the shore. "Are they done building their boat yet?" she asked with a hint of fatigue in her voice. John, who had been monitoring the progress through a pair of binoculars, shook his head. "I don't think they're building a boat. There are 4 locations and none of them look like boats or canoes," he replied. Kim squinted as she surveyed the beach, her eyes narrowing as she made out the shapes more clearly. "Because they're not boats," she asserted, turning to John. "Fortify the port side now, Dad. If they're building what I think they are, we'll need to use the wood armor on the starboard side and move some of it to the port, and fast." Kim pointed towards the structures taking shape on the beach. "Take a closer look, Dad. Those are large T's, 4 of them." John peered through his binoculars again, his eyes widening as he finally saw what Kim was describing. "Yeah, so?" "They're ballistas, Dad," Kim explained with a serious tone. Bob, overhearing the conversation, stood up abruptly. "I'll be damned," Bob muttered. "She's right. They are. The crew sprang into action, reallocating resources to reinforce the ship's port side. Wooden logs previously used as makeshift armor on the starboard were hurriedly moved. The tension was noticeable on their faces, as each member of the crew worked with a sense of urgency, driven by the fear of the powerful ancient siege weapons that were being assembled ashore. As they worked, John and Bob discussed their options. "We need to be ready for anything," John said. "If those ballistas become operational, they could do some serious damage." Kim nodded, her mind racing with strategies. "We need to keep everyone sharp and ready. I'll make sure medical supplies are prepared for any injuries. And Dad, we should think about any possible countermeasures." The air was thick with the salty tang of the sea and the undercurrent of impending conflict as they fortified their floating sanctuary. Each bang of the hammer echoed like a drumbeat, counting down to a confrontation. John hurried to the engine room where Todd was busy at work. "How long before you get those engines going?" he asked, peering over the scattered tools and makeshift parts. Todd looked up from the 3D printer, where a crucial part had just been formed. "The part's ready, sir. I'm improvising on the rest, but it should be able to run in roughly half an hour," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Nice work, Todd, but I fear we might not have a half an hour. Can you put a rush on that?" John asked, trying to mask his urgency with a half smile. Todd chuckled. "You want me to go faster, or do you want it to work?" John smiled back. "Do your thing, Todd," he said, patting him on the shoulder before walking out. As he arrived on deck, Bob reported, "It looks like they're prepping to shoot, and they're lighting them on fire, sir." Kim yells, "Look out!" pulling John down just as a ballista bolt sizzled past, extinguishing itself in the ocean just past the ship. "They're zeroing in," Bob noted. "With no wind or current to aid our escape, we are sitting ducks," Bob said. "It will be half an hour at best before Todd can get the engines to work," John relayed, just as another bolt embedded itself into a section of the ship's wooden armor. "Get buckets, put those flames out now," John commanded, pointing at Bick and Tony, who hurried off to douse the growing fire. Bob's eyes were fixed on the tribal warriors. "They're prepping all four for another volley. One hit last time. You can bet they're zeroed in now." His prediction held true as 4 bolts struck the Celeb Mariner almost simultaneously, rocking the ship. One of the logs shattered, falling into the water. "Engines, Todd, we really could use those engines soon," John yelled down the hatch. 2 more minutes, sir," Todd's voice echoed back. As another barrage of bolts rocked the boat, Kim was struck by debris, collapsing to the deck in agony, with blood gushing from her leg. "I got you," Tony said, diving to catch her before her head hit the deck. "It's not that bad, Kim. You were hit with splinters from the armor. It looks a lot worse than it is." As Tony rushed Kim to the medbay, John followed, but Bob's urgent call kept him on deck. "John, we need you here." "The area around the ballistas won't go out, sir. The bolts themselves burn brighter when water is applied. They're reigniting the armor. It's a nightmare, John," Bick reported. Bob inspected closer. "Yank off these sections now and throw them into the ocean. Remove the bolts quickly. They're covered in a black ooze that burns hotter and brighter when it gets wet." "Get on it, men," John ordered as Todd managed to fire up the engines. The ship lurched forward, avoiding another volley of bolts. However, the engines backfired and shut off again. "They're repositioning the ballistas. We don't have much time," Bob warned. Smoke billowed around Todd as he labored over the crippled engines. Coughing from the dense fumes, he looked up at John with a grimace. "Sir, it's not good. It's going to be another couple of hours. Easy," he shouted, waving his hand to clear the air. John ran back onto the deck just in time to see another volley of ballista bolts fall short of their mark. "Nice, we are out of range," he exhaled in brief relief. "No, sir, they just haven't zeroed in yet," Bob corrected him grimly. John moving towards the dinghy. "How far out would you say they are?" he asked Bob, peering towards the beach. "Maybe 200 yards, Bob estimated, squinting. "And where's their leader?" John asked, scanning the shoreline. "She's the one on horseback still out front, sir," Bob pointed out. John nodded and picked up the shotgun, checking its shells. He quickly unloaded the buckshot and asked, "Where are those slugs?" "They're attached to the stock, sir. Should be 8 there," Bob replied. John loaded 4 slugs and raised his weapon to take aim. His first shot hit the sand. That kicked up a cloud just short of the tribal leader. 4 feet short and 2 feet to the left, John, Bob called out, his eyes fixed through the binoculars. John adjusted his aim and fired again. This time the shot found its mark. The tribal leader's head exploded in a gruesome spectacle, knocking her off her horse. Her warriors, in disbelief, rushed to her side, their ranks thrown into chaos. Without hesitation, John fired again and again, dropping 2 more warriors. The rest of the tribe scrambled towards the tree line in panic. "I just bought you some time, Todd," John shouted towards the engine room. Bob turned to John with a serious look on his face. "Let's hope it's enough," he said, as they both watched the tribal warriors disappear into the forest. Tony ran onto the deck, urgency etched across his face. "Sir, I know this isn't the time, but it's Kim," he blurted out, breathless. John's heart skipped. "What about Kim?" he demanded, his voice sharp with worry. She started mumbling incoherently, making no sense. "I've removed the splinters and stopped the bleeding, but her leg is covered in black specks and her skin looks really irritated. John, I'm scared," Tony confessed, his usual composure slipping. The words, "I'm scared," sent a jolt through John, propelling him into a dead sprint across the deck, his agility belying his age. He charged into the medbay like a storm, tossing his hat aside without breaking stride. Tony followed John closely, like a flame to a match. Kim lay on the medbay table, unconscious and convulsing, foam pouring from her mouth as 2 crew members struggled to hold her steady. "Do something," John cried out desperately. John shoved one of the crew members aside and took over. He glanced around. "Do something, Lance," he commanded the medical assistant, who hesitated with a syringe in hand. Lance quickly administered an injection, and Kim's violent shaking ceased almost immediately. "That's a sedative. Let's hope it keeps her stable," he said, his voice tense. "Why didn't you do that sooner?" John demanded, his frustration boiling over as he pushed Lance against the wall. "That was the 3rd dose, sir," Lance replied, his back pressed against the cold metal. "I was afraid it might kill her." John's anger faded as quickly as it had flared. "Sorry, Lance, I don't know what came over me," he muttered, stepping back to allow the medic space to work. Turning back to Kim, John's expression softened into one of deep concern. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lance sighed, avoiding John's gaze. "I only help out here because she asked me to a few weeks back," he admitted. The medbay was suffused with a heavy silence, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor tracking Kim's vital signs. The dim light flickered overhead. Around her, the crew stood in a solemn semicircle, faces etched with worry. Kim, their only trained doctor, lay unconscious, the severity of her condition rendering her helpless, leaving the crew adrift in uncharted waters. Lance moved in his hands, trembling slightly as he adjusted the IV drip. John, normally a pillar of strength, appeared shaken, his eyes rarely leaving Kim's face. Tony leaned against a nearby wall, arms folded, his mind racing through their dwindling options. The ship's gentle sway seemed to mock their desperation, a stark reminder of their vulnerability in the vast, unforgiving ocean. The monitor emitted a sudden series of rapid beeps. Everyone's heart skipped. Lance rushed to adjust the equipment, his movements fraught with tension. The beeps slowed, stabilizing once more, but the scare left a lingering fear. Outside, the ocean roared, indifferent to the human plight. Inside, as they watched over their fallen comrade, the crew of the Celeb Mariner faced the stark reality. Without Kim, their chances of survival dimmed like the flickering light above. What would they do if the light went out completely? This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.